This is the Long Haul Pedalcast with John McGavick and Steve Schools. Incredible stories of endurance coming from the prairies. Be inspired to create your own long haul journey. Today on the Pedalcast, we talk to Paulo Saldanha, who in our opinion is the top applied sports scientist in Canada. He is currently head of performance for a WorldTour cycling team and has coached Tour de France cyclists like Mike Woods, Hugo Houle, Dan Martin, and Chris Froome. In part one, we hear about Paulo's journey from kinesiology student with no interest in endurance sports to Canada's first sub-9 hour Hawaii Ironman, to Canada's first finisher in the ultra endurance cycling event Race Across America, to bringing the concept of power to the masses and establishing one of Canada's top state-of-the-art training facilities in Montreal. In part two, Paulo shares his journey with Canadian legend Mike Woods. Mike is the only human on earth to run a sub 4-minute mile and win a Tour de France stage. Those remarkable results don't reflect the gut-wrenching journey in between and the part Paulo played in the most unlikely combination of sporting accomplishments you will ever hear. Paulo rarely gives interviews, so sit back and savor these incredible and unlikely stories to the absolute top of endurance sport. Enjoy. Welcome everyone to the Long Haul Pedalcast. Today we have an extremely special guest. We have Paulo Saldanha, who is one of Canada's top applied sports scientists, who's performance lead at a World Tour cycling team. And welcome, Paulo, to the Pedalcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, also, we have my co-host, John McGavick. And John, just briefly, you have a connection with Paulo in the past.
Yeah, I don't think I can share all of the stories about Paulo because we've had some intimate moments when Paulo was doing this iconic race. But Paulo and I met as graduate students at McGill University. And often when I give a scientific talk, I have to have a disclosure slide that says, what biases do I have or what conflicts of interest? So I've admired Paulo for a very long time. Many of the things that you've said to us or the experiences that I've had with you have led to my own journey, and they're key elements to why I'm here today. So obviously, I'm really excited to see Paulo here today too, and to hear your story, because after 1998, you went on your own journey. We've connected a few times, but I'm so excited to hear about all the things that have happened since we were in grad school together at McGill.
Yeah, so that's cool that there's that connection. And Paulo, right now you are a performance lead for a World Tour cycling team, running the whole performance department. But you've worked with all these great athletes that we want to talk about, but you have this incredible journey. You were, 35 plus years ago, a kinesiology student, a hockey player with probably very little interest in endurance sports. And now you're at, the top of endurance sports. Take us through this wild and incredible journey that you've been on, over the last 30 plus years.
Sure. And Johnny, thank you for the kind words. It's always nice to hear that you've impacted someone's life, and I appreciate them, those words. It's a long story, lots of chapters in it. I think everything pretty much started with me being in the wrong sport. At 5'7", 150 pounds, you're not exactly a hockey player, even though I was adamant about playing in the NHL. That was never going to happen, certainly not with my skill level. But I found myself attracted to sports, and in the kinesiology program at McGill, I wasn't much of a student, a little bit of ADD, ADHD, and I found myself in a laboratory at the Arthur Curry gym area that they used to have at McGill University. And I was at the back of the room in my basketball shoes on, in back of the lab with my basketball shoes on, not really paying attention. And we had a professor by the name of David Montgomery there who's passed away, sadly, but he was a mentor to me. And David was trying to explain how to do a VO2 max test. And we were probably 30 kids and 30 people in the class. And I was at the back speaking to a friend, not paying attention, and all of a sudden the room goes deathly quiet. And it was like a gauntlet of heads turning towards me with Montgomery at the front pointing to me saying, "You," with the finger, "walk up to the front. We're going to use you as a guinea pig. And so I hop on the treadmill, kind of cocky, in my mind thinking, I'm going to just jump off after 3 minutes. There's no way I'm doing this. But as I'm running, I hear him tell the class, this is a very untrained as an individual, as you can see. So therefore, we expect that this VO2 max test will take 4 to 6 minutes. He will probably fall into the normal range of, the average adult in your age group, which is 40 to 45, VO2 max, and so on and so forth. And that did something in me that got me very fired up. And I'm like, I'm going to show this guy. Anyway, 14 minutes later, I'm still running on that treadmill with my knee-high basketball socks and ankle-high basketball shoes, and fell off the back of the treadmill because I would not put my hands onto that treadmill. I was going till I was going, and that was it. This is going till I fell off.
And this is that traditional test where like every minute they ramp things up. So
exactly.
Every minute, like and it becomes like exponential how difficult it becomes. Yes.
Exactly.
And also, like, this is a classic exercise phys move, is because Paulo was yapping in the back, he's got the mouthpiece in, right? So they're measuring the oxygen that's coming out, and we're able to actually measure. It's not an indirect test, it's a direct test.
Right.
So
exactly.
When Monty says that to you, you can't respond, right? You just have to let the rage boil and keep running.
But what was interesting is that after about 7 or 8 minutes, Montgomery stopped talking, started going, what do we have here? So anyway, I did the test. I eventually recovered and stuff. And he called me to his office after that class. And he sat me down and he said, Paulo, what are you doing? And I'm like, what are you talking? What do you mean? He said, it was a very poignant moment for me. He said, you have so much talent. You have more talent than I do by far. He says, I've done the Ironman, Paulo. I've done a ton of marathons, and you're squandering that talent. You're not paying attention in class. You're distracted. You're not motivated. What are you doing? Don't waste that. Don't waste that. And that really profoundly impacted me to the point where I said, well, what do I do? He said, you have to become an endurance athlete. You've never, ever trained in your whole life except played hockey. And you're a hockey player with a preliminary VO2 max of 72.
Unreal.
And he says, you can get that over 80 with training. And if you can get that over 80 with training, you can become a world-class athlete. And I said, well, what sport? How about triathlon? And so that started me on my journey, actually, of considering triathlon. Now, it wasn't quite that quick a turnaround because I still had a semester to go. And I didn't start running. I didn't start training. He planted the seed in the back of my mind.
Okay.
So I'd find myself that summer working at a hockey camp where I was doing fitness training for the riders, that the hockey players that came to the camp. And of course, as many things happen in terms of this genesis, beer was a big instigator for me to get into a beer bet with my friends to say, we're going to do a triathlon next year. And so we had a beer bet on doing a triathlon, and we decided we were going to do the Ottawa Triathlon. And it was, I think we were in October, and we were going to do it in July. I think that's what it was at. It was something around those dates. And of course, I did no training, no preparation. And I did take a learn to swim course, because if you'd have thrown me in the deep end, I would have drowned, because I did not literally know how to swim. Like, I could not put one arm in front of the other. So I needed to take the swim course to learn how to swim. So it started with me blowing bubbles in the water like they take little kids to do. And I was, not a little kid anymore. So what was interesting about that is that I hated swimming. Hated it with a passion, but I had to do it in order to not drown in the triathlon. I went to that race against my buds, and I was third last out of the water, and I finished dead last from all my friends, not last in the race necessarily, but last amongst all my friends, and lost for the case of 2-4 that I had to buy each of them. There were 4 of them.
Wow.
So much like the words that David Montgomery said to me on the treadmill, that spurred me on. So then I started to say, okay, now I'm going to actually train. And the first thing, what's the most logical thing you do as an uninformed individual, is you say, well, I'm going to run a 10K and see what my baseline is at. So I ran a 10K in about 36 minutes with really no training at all. And David Montgomery said, you should run with a friend in McGill who's a runner. His name is Alfie Pauletti. He's also training for the Ironman. So I started to get into that Ironman training phase and asked Montgomery for a bunch of feedback on how to prepare for it. So the seed in my mind was planted, and that was still 1984, I want to say.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And remember, I only did my first Ironman in 1988 and 89, so it took a while to build up. Why? Because if you don't know how to swim, very hard to be successful in triathlon. So fast forward 1 year, we rebet Double or Nothing, my buddies and I. Same triathlon, except this year I trained, and I trained fairly hard. And I ended up finishing 8th overall in that race, and I beat all of my buddies. And of course, I was stocked up in beer for a while. So that was the genesis of it, was really a beer bet that got me serious about doing triathlon. It wasn't some self-driven piece I had in me. I have a lot of drive, but I need a catalyst for that drive. And at that age, it was beer. Now it's a lot of different things.
Sure.
But so that kind of started it all, and just to go fast forward, towards the end of my triathlon career, I did a lot of testing in the lab, and I ended up with a VO2 max of 83.5. So I went from about 72-ish to about 83.5 over the course of about 7 years. But that was a rough road, One of the stories that I have was, I thought, well, if I'm gonna be an elite triathlete, which I decided I wanted to do after I finished 8th in the Ottawa Triathlon, I basically said, I need to become a swimmer. And so what's the best way to become a swimmer is I got to join the McGill swim team. So I show up, and the coach at the time was Francois Lorrain. And I said to Francois, I want to join the team. I'm a McGill student. And he says, okay, well, you're a walk-on.
Walk-on.
Jump in and give me a couple of laps in each of the strokes. And each of the strokes?
What?
I didn't know what each
strokes?
Of the strokes
What are you
were,
talking about?
Exactly. So he shook his head and he said, well, jump in and give me freestyle. And basically, he stopped me after about 50 meters and he said, look, you have to take a master's learn to swim properly course before you can even consider swimming. And most of these kids here have been swimming all their lives. You can't be on our team. You're going to be the slowest guy in the slowest lane, getting lapped 5 times in 100 meters by the slowest person. So it can't really take you. And so I was really disappointed, but I did join a master's group, and I did up my speed, and I went back to him the next year. And I think he saw my perseverance and he let me in. And over the course of about 4 years, I went from being the slowest guy in the slowest lane, getting lapped by the slowest person in the slowest lane, to moving up to the fastest guy in the slowest lane, to then moving into the slowest guy in the medium lane and the fastest guy in the medium lane, to being the slowest guy in the fast lane. That's about as fast as I got.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting progression. And the beautiful thing about swimming is it's all interval training based, and every workout is a competition. You don't want somebody to catch your feet. You're trying to catch the next person in front of you. And that really got my competitive juices flowing. And it was the reason why I made such progress, to the point where I went from a complete non-swimmer, and in my first Hawaii Ironman, I came out with the leaders in 51 minutes.
Wow.
And that's pretty rare
Yep.
for somebody who didn't grow up swimming. So it's an interesting story.
And it kind of reminds me of something you said in a different interview about focusing on your failures and how do you respond to failure. And it sounds to me like for you, failure was a motivator. And
there's no
burned
doubt.
on a
There's no
lot
doubt.
of extra work.
It's funny. I've worked with a lot of different athletes in different sports in my coaching endeavors. And there's a common theme I noticed. I worked with, Jennifer Heil, freestyle skier, gold medalist and silver medalist, Alex Bilodeau, Mikkel Kingsbury, all in that same sport. I've worked with triathletes, professional cyclists, you name it, cross-country skiers, many different projects in my engagements with B210 for Olympic sport in Canada through 5 different Olympic cycles, both summer and winter. And there's a common thread that relates to what you just mentioned, John, and that's the commonalities between the champions and the ones who just don't convert is that they all hate to fail. There isn't a single athlete that likes to fail, but the ones that don't let the failure destroy them, the ones who are actually driven even more by that failure to succeed, are really the difference makers. They're the ones that actually become champions. the ones who buckle and they get into that negative self-talk and they let it defeat them, and oh, I'm not good, and how come I failed? I don't like the failure. That becomes self-destructive, and it becomes a self-limiter to a lot of athletes, and it's essentially psychological, but it's also part of your makeup, your mental resilience, your psychological makeup. It takes time to learn to cope with that. And we often see, especially in athletes, younger athletes, who are the heroes of their community, the kings of their community who are winning everything.
Yep.
They're never taught to lose. And what happens is they develop as these winners, and then they get thrown into a much bigger pool where the talent base is much deeper, and they can't cope with it because they've never been taught how to handle not succeeding at something. It's an important lesson for young athletes, I think, to learn, is that failure is the only way you get to success. It's the doors you have to open to get to success. And if you let them keep you out of it, if you let them close in your face without trying to barge through them, you're not going to make it.
That's so good.
That's some serious wisdom. Those are failure are the doors you have to open to get to success. Yeah. That's really, really cool. And just going back to your journey, like you obviously went through a lot of difficulty trying to advance your Ironman career. But I don't know if you want to get into this story, but I did hear a story about you taking a one-way bus ticket to Arizona to train. And really, I think what I'm hearing a little bit is back in the 80s, there really wasn't that much information available for training. And so you were just trying to go to this group, run with this person, swim with this group. And then, hey, I hear there's a triathlon group in Arizona. Maybe take us through that kind of story, just, some of the things you were willing to do to try and learn that sport.
Yeah, well, my logic at the time, and I don't know if it's changed in the sport and how people prepare. It's so fast now. It's incredible, the depth of talent in triathlon. But back then, it was a relatively new sport, and being a pro was kind of an unpaved road to a degree. A lot of the Americans had an advantage in that they had these big, strong training groups, good weather all year long. Not as a Canadian, and certainly a Montrealer, I didn't have that. But what I did is I said, let me see if I can track down where the best Canadian trains. And let me just go there. Let me put a pin on that map and let me just go there. Because if that guy's training there, then I need to train there. And let me surround myself with the best swimmers, the best runners, and the best cyclists, and have them raise my game. So it's not entirely accurate that I took a one-way bus ticket. What is the real truth there is that a good buddy of mine volunteered to pack everything I owned into the back of his Ford Econoline van, and we drove down. He drove me down to Austin, Texas, which is where an individual by the name of Nick Taylor was. And Nick was the best Canadian triathlete at the time. And so I got settled in Austin, Texas with everything I owned. And I basically trained my butt off with the guy, had him hammer me into the ground to raise my game a little bit. And he was a pretty particular fellow, Nick Taylor. I've lost touch with him since, but he's a very competitive guy, but a very good guy who helped me quite substantially. But the interesting story is not so much that I went down to Austin, Texas, but it's how I managed to get the resources to go down to Austin, Texas. Now, you remember, it's mid-'80s, and nobody really knows the sport that much. And I had a buddy of mine who was a fairly successful real estate guy who said, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine, Paolo. I think you have some talent in triathlon. I saw what you did in Ottawa. I think that this guy can help you. And so I got put into this guy's office. His name is Gerald Eisenman, and his brother's name is Mark, and they're real estate developers in Montreal. I think they've since retired, but I sat in his office and I told him my story. I told him that I'm going to become the first Canadian professional triathlete to compete in the Ironman in Hawaii. I want to break 9 hours. I know I'm going to do it, and I need help. I need some support financially. I don't have any record of success really, other than my trajectory, and I'm looking for some sponsorship. And he listened to me. It was a little bit longer spiel than that. He listened to me. And he said, let me step out here. I'll be right back. So he stepped out of his office. 5 minutes later, he came back and he put an envelope on his desk.
Whoa. And
the envelope was a check for $5,000. Now, in 1984, I could live for almost 6 months on $5,000.
Yeah.
That was a tremendous amount of money. And so when I opened it, as I was opening it, he said, "So Paulo, I see your passion. I think you're going to succeed. So I'm going to help you financially, but this is not a gift. It's not a gift." And so I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "No, you have to pay me this back. You have to pay me this back." And I'm like, "Well, what if I don't succeed? How can I pay you back? Like, will you be able to wait until I get a job and pay you back that way?" He says, "No. He says, "You're not going to pay me back the money. You're going to succeed. And one day you're going to be in my position and you're going to do exactly the same thing for somebody else."
Wow. Wow.
And that started me off on my journey. That's how I got to Austin, Texas. And every year after I retired, and Mike Woods was a recipient of this, every year after I retired, I coached at least one athlete for free to give back to that guy.
Wow.
That
Crazy story, isn't it?
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
amazing.
But that is, paying back for that, that chance that you got, you're helping others, give them a chance. Okay, so that's and you actually, maybe touch a little bit on where you got to in your Ironman career. Like you did compete in Hawaii. You did, I think, break a sub 9 hour Ironman. Maybe just take us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Ironman is a special race. Extremely hot, very windy, the big island of Hawaii. And I'd never been to Hawaii before. I did all the wrong things, as far as not a lot of heat acclimatization. Remember back then too, you're not exactly optimized for speed. I raced it in a Speedo.
The whole way, way.
Yeah, in a Speedo. Yeah, in a bathing suit. I still have a picture of that. And, back then we didn't have aerodynamic optimizations. We didn't have all these fancy wheels, and the equipment was much, much slower. Now they're going a lot faster. But all of my friends, consultants, even people at university, including David Montgomery, were like, "Paulo, you must go to this race and respect it. You cannot. It's a 10-hour, 11-hour endeavor. In your first Ironman, you're going to blow up. The question is when. And how long can you hang on for?" And so, of course, I didn't listen to any of them. And I went all out from the gun.
Well, let's go.
Swim, bike, run. And of course, I did blow up, but I only blew up at about 20 kilometers of the run. So I had 20 kilometers to do the death march. And I still ran I think a 3:15, which, I was on pace for a lot faster, but I did blow up there. So I ended up, I think I went 8:51 or so back then, which was I think it was the fastest first Hawaii Ironman at the time.
Sure.
For a rookie. Oh, yeah. But what's interesting about that is I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of preparation, but I never really got a lot faster, which is interesting. I did a bunch of Ironmans. I competed on the World Cup Ironman circuit. I competed in New Zealand, the Double Brown, and Australia and Japan, Ironman Canada. Even they had a race back in the day called the Southeast U.S. Championships in Cape Cod, which was another Ironman race. Although it wasn't Ironman branded, it was a U.S. Championships. I did a bunch of races and never really got a lot faster than just under 9 hours. I think probably I'm still a bit of a stockier built kind of guy. I wasn't quite the gazelle runner I think that I would have liked to have become. And it's really tough to change your phenotype. I had some fast fibers in my legs, but I don't think I was ever able to reach my triathlon goals of being on a podium in the Ironman, which I never did. So I was like second tier pro at the time, So it was pretty good for a Canadian who lived, as a hockey player for many, many years, who started very, very late. I'll take that, but I did not meet my my Ironman objective, during my career, unfortunately.
Sure. Yeah. And you learned a lot from that, right? Like you were trying to improve and you're trying to figure things out. And at some point you're concluding your Ironman triathlon racing career. And now maybe kind of take us to that next chapter of, getting into personal training, getting into even thinking about coaching, how did that transition start to happen?
Well, curiosity is what drove most of it. I had a lot of questions because I made a lot of mistakes because I was really coaching myself. And I thought of going back to school, which I didn't do right away. I started a business called Premier Performance in Montreal. And as part of that business, I put a high performance branch in it. And I adopted these strategies that I had previously adopted when I had to stay for periods of time in Montreal on intensity-based training. And I guess now it's called HIIT training. It's the rage, and a lot of people are doing it. But back then, it wasn't the thing, you know. The Germans were very much into long, slow volume and lactate testing and things of that nature. But I kind of developed these interval training matrices to kind of try to improve my performance on as little time as I could put on the bike, you know, so to optimize that process, especially since I would spend blocks of time in the US when I got better and better doing volume periods. But before that, I had periodized it so that I would do intensity before volume. It's kind of the opposite of what people were doing. And it did work fairly well, but it also was the genesis for the creation of PowerWatts, essentially. You know, that was the initial part of it, to take these interval structures and also borrow from the interval structures I had encountered in swimming, which a lot of coaches in cycling also borrow from, and to use those to create these optimization techniques on the bike, using power as a prescriptor and helping me to improve, but also helping me to help others improve. And that really gained a lot of traction. I think we were the first people on this planet to put together a bunch of ergs, they were called CompuTrainers at the time, and to build a system of group training using the high intensity interval training model to improve performance over the course of the winter. And we went from, 3 clients to 400 clients in no time. And actually the company still runs today. We have 21 locations around the world, and it's still very popular. So it's kind of my own little success story. It's not a big company, and it's not, got 10 million people doing it, but it's still the genesis of what happened back in the day with interval training and using power as a prescriptor for it. So that was kind of really interesting.
Well, and one of the things that stuck with me as a grad student at the time is we only ever got power on those old Swedish ergs that had the little
monarchs.
The monarchs, right? We were doing monarchs. And we weren't being taught, we were being taught heart rate training, right? We were being taught RPEs. And then in 98, you invite me and a friend, Kip, over to this refurbished dentist's office that has 4 CompuTrainers in one room and 100 bikes in the other room. And so not only were you the first one maybe to do that setup, right? I think you're one of the first guys to bring CompuTrainer like to the masses, to say, let's start going. And then this catalyzes, I think, where Premier Studio is now. And maybe that's part of your desire for risk, but also your ability to see the future in terms of where cycling was going. Can you tell us like how that commitment to CompuTrainer, because that would have been a big financial risk too, right? But that commitment to CompuTrainer and that commitment to power came to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, I had been training on CompuTrainers for a couple of years, so I knew what we could do with them. And the idea came from training with a buddy of mine, and we just put one next to the other, and it was simple. Like, okay, this is kind of fun. If we do these intervals together, imagine if we had a software in front of us on the screen that could guide us through it. And so we developed the software for that. And then I said, well, what if we could take this to the masses and have 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 people? And what if we could base it on a percentage of everybody's individual fitness signature? And what if we could take a group and have them all do the same relative intensity, but get a different experience out of it, and lead that as a coach? And so that's how it kind of grew. And, at this point, I think we have about maybe 10,000 people doing PowerWatts with about 80 coaches. It's a particular methodology. We have our own indoor multi-adjustable bikes with our own software that's 4 generations higher than what, used to be back then. And it gained so much popularity. People loved it, because we got a lot of fitness executives who came in who have, 4 or 6 hours a week to train. So it became their sweet spot, their area where they could come and get the most bang for the buck. And they would start the spring training outside and feel like they're 4 levels above anybody else, And it wasn't just a bunch of junk miles. It was quality-based training. And people not only are challenged by that because we gamified it quite a bit, but they see the benefits of that transition to outdoors very, very quickly. And that made it addictive. When you can show improvement and you could feel that, then it becomes very, very addictive. We have, I think our compliance back then was like 98%. In other words, when somebody joined, 98% of them were still there 3 years later.
Wow.
So it was very sticky, sticky
which is
experience.
Yeah, really impressive. Like, it really sounds like you were just experimenting with these things and then like, hey, let's try this. And it just took off. And what about power-based training? Like, I recall 1993, there's an article in Velo News where Greg LeMond's talking about who was the top rider in the 80s, more or less. And he's trying to come back in his career, and he's going to do his training based on power. And he was like, yeah, this is the future of cycling, but no one else was saying that at the time. How did you, and power really it's kind of like the money ball of cycling. Like, you were able to measure very clearly your improvement, whether you're indoors, outdoors, whether it's a good day or bad day. How did you see that? Because it's very innovative, but it's not like for people that are based on heart rate, that was the training method to make that shift. How did that kind of happen for you, and how did you kind of see that and play with that?
Yeah, I mean, my interest in power really started at McGill when I was using heart rate to prepare for a half marathon. And we had these things, they were called sport testers. They're heart rate monitors way back in the day. I think it might have been bought by that Finnish company that does Polar now.
Yeah, right.
But the challenge I had with heart rate monitors is that, so I had gotten to the point where I knew I could run at about 139 beats per minute under a 6-minute mile. And I had it all worked out that I was going to run in this heart rate zone. And I had built up a fair amount of load, and then I had tapered down after that load. And what ended up happening is I completely messed up my half because I tried to follow my heart rate, and the disconnect between my RPE and the speed and the heart rate was completely jumbled. And we know now the reasons for that. It's change in plasma volume when you taper. It's the change in parasympathetic stimulation of the heart. It's recovery. All those things change the dynamic of where your zones are, and that's what got me kind of messed up. And I started to realize that heart rate is quite variable. It can change with caffeine, nutrition, stress, recovery, plasma volume shift, heat. All these things impacted it. So I started to lose confidence in the heart rate monitor, even though it was the thing at the time. And that moved me to explore a little bit more. And I did explore it on the Monarch. I played around with different power capabilities and using that. It's a different sport, obviously. It's cycling, but that's what kind of originally got me going. And obviously getting a CompuTrainer really cemented that, because I saw how quickly one could prescribe training and how there's a lag in heart rate response to a particular effort, whereas power is instantaneous. And if you can train power instantaneously, you can really, you have your finger more on the pulse of what's going on, and you could really, throw a wide net across all the energy systems, to prescribe across sprints all the way through to endurance. So that kind of got me going. And of course, then I trial and errored on myself, and then also trial and errored on some athletes I was working with. And that kind of grew into bringing in the public. And we also trial and errored on the public and found what worked and what didn't. And so for 4 years, we built different programs, and we measured the outcome of those programs to see, wow, this resulted in 3% more improvement in performance than this type of set. VO2 max at this level, this time of year, this many repetitions improved us by that much, whereas shorter anaerobic explosive work didn't do the same, and we want to improve this. So we kind of modified things, and in a sense, it's trial and error. It's not really research, it's trial and error. It's innovation and trial and error that we did that got us to better understand how you can manipulate power and prescription to improve performance.
Yeah, no, and that's, again, that experimentation, just trying that trial and error, what is working, what's not, and trying to learn from that has definitely been a, kind of a modus operandi for you. Now, so kind of starting to fast forward a little bit, like you're running this Premier Studio, You're building PowerWatts, but we're still not, I think, into the 2000s. Right? So now you're doing this, but how do you start moving towards like true high performance coaching and ultimately getting to actually coach some of the top riders in the world?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is that I always had a natural curiosity, as I've said, and I thought that the answers to the questions I had on what's the secret formula, which is what I thought I was looking for, I thought they lay in education. I thought they lay in research. And that's why I went to McGill, and that's where I met John and did my master's in exercise phys at McGill. I met him there, and I thought I would get the answers there, but I really ended up with a lot more questions because, academia is not always very applied, and it's theoretical, and they hope to teach you the foundational aspects of understanding the physiology, but really the PhD is garnered in the field. The practical application of things and what works and doesn't work is gained in the field. I didn't know that at the time, and if I did, I probably wouldn't have gone to do my graduate work at McGill. But I'm glad I did, because it was a great experience, and I got to do RAAM as an interesting project, and that took me to a whole new level of depth and understanding of endurance compared to even Ironman racing. So,
and just a little bit on that, like I feel like that RAAM story is so fascinating. But for people that don't know, RAAM is like a race across America, and it's 9 to 10 days nonstop. You could continue riding and not sleep. Like it was really the original ultra endurance event. And my understanding is you did your thesis on yourself training and competing in this ultra endurance event. Like that's not normal for, I think, a master's thesis, for someone to put them through that kind of extreme situation just to learn and advance. Like, yeah, maybe, I mean, obviously there's quite a lot of stories there, but maybe just briefly on that experience and that mindset to say, I'm going to put myself through this to learn and to study.
Yeah. So RAAM's an interesting event. It's quite eclectic in the people who compete in it. It's a bit of an underground grunge kind of event, or at least back then it was. Now it's become much bigger. I don't think we had a Canadian that had ever finished it.
Right.
Few had tried. And, I got to thinking when I was going to McGill, I really wanted to explore where is the end of human endurance?
Wow.
What's the limit? Like, I know I can go to an Ironman, and the only question there is not can I finish, it's how fast can I go? And I also Olympic distance races. I did a world championship, and I did some racing for the national team as well. I knew I could do those races. A marathon, I knew I could finish a marathon, just a question of how fast. But what was intriguing to me about RAAM was me telling myself that I actually don't think I can finish this. This is cuckoo. This is a cuckoo event. Starts in Encinitas, California. The gun goes off. It finishes in Savannah, Georgia, 5,000 kilometers later. The finish line is there. It's up to you how fast you can do it. And you have to finish within a certain time of the winner. So to me, that represented risk, challenge, and the unknown. And I ventured into that unknown. Maybe my eyes were half closed because I was fearful. I was fearful. There's no doubt I was fearful. Because what is true risk? It's not knowing you're going to be able to succeed at something. It's not having, it's taking the steps towards something and having no safety net. If you can do that, that's empowering. That's empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
And that's the attraction I had to RAAM. And there's some great stories in RAAM, probably some of them not fit for public consumption. But the one that sticks out the most in my mind is I think I was 30 kilometers from the finish line, and we were like 9.5 days in, or some crazy amount of days. I was exhausted. It was a heat wave through the South. We rode through the South. We rode through the Rockies. It was insane. I had all kinds of physical problems. I'm not going to get into the details. Again, it's probably going to make everybody cringe if I explain
Only
what
one.
happened specifically.
Only one hand worked. I remember that.
Yeah, only
Like,
one
whoa.
hand
We
worked.
were giving you Advil, and one hand was acting like a plate.
One hand was a Skeletor hand,
Right.
Oh,
that
goodness.
had no muscle tone left due
Yeah.
to the impingement in my neck.
Yeah.
But it was. I have a picture of Johnny with his hand on my shoulder. I'm leaning up against a wall. It's 120 degrees out. I have my body up against a brick wall, and my head is like this.
Yeah.
Down, my chin is towards my sternum. I can't raise my head.
Yeah.
I can't raise my head. And if the extensor muscles start to fail and you can't raise your head, how could you ride a bike? And I could see, Johnny was like, well, maybe we'll duct tape your helmet back, or maybe we'll put a mirror here and you can look down at the mirror. They were problem solving, and it was great. I had a great crew, I had Kip and I had Johnny and I had a couple of doctors and a chef, and we had a driver who drove a vehicle that they called the Death Star because he was about 100 years old and nobody wanted to go into that vehicle.
No.
There's a lot of crazy stories, but that one there, with me being 20 or 30 kilometers from the finish line and saying to myself, I've gone 4,900 kilometers and I could legitimately not finish this race right here. And I don't know what happened, but somehow we mustered a way to solve it. And I did get to the finish line. And thankfully, you guys were a big support structure
Yeah.
to make sure that happened.
Yeah. So
and
just to say, you were like, I'm done. I'm done. We were at a Burger King in Savannah, Georgia, and Michael Sherman, the race director, I think he was there at the same time. And you're like, I'm
Yep.
done. I'm done. And we're all like, Paulo, you got 1 hour to go, 30K an hour. Just muster up. No, I'm done. I'm done. And you found it in yourself. And I think we only had a couple hours. So for people that don't know RAAM, you have to finish within 48 hours of the leader. The leader went through in 8 days and 8 hours. And we were there at 10 days and 4 hours or something, right? And
yeah.
Sherman is getting ready to do the awards ceremony in 4 hours. And all you got to do is ride 30K from Burger King to the Holiday Inn. Right? You're like, no, I'm done. One guy
you
actually
guys were a big part of that, though, John. You guys helped me to come out of that. This was a team event.
It was,
it really was a team event. Yeah, I had to.
That moment was, but
Medals,
you were a hero. You were impressive.
And just to add just a little bit to that, I mean, we literally could do a whole podcast series, I think, on doing RAAM. And, John was part of your crew, which is really amazing. And for those that don't know RAAM, RAAM actually was one of the biggest cycling events in North America in the 80s. When I was a little kid trying to watch cycling, there was 3 races on TV: the Tour de France, Paris-Roubaix, and RAAM on ABC Wide World of Sports. And even before I was a cyclist, I watched RAAM and I was fascinated. So you can go on YouTube and watch some of these ABC Wide World of Sports just to understand, this is true ultra endurance, what you went through. And you did your master's thesis on this just to study yourself, crazy stuff. So,
and we collected power data very, very
with
early
a
days
power tap.
there, power tap data there and nutrition. We were kind of ahead of our time there with the information we collected. And now, carbohydrate intake is the thing of the day, and back then, it's interesting because one quick story, we were convinced that we were going to feed off of an elemental diet, like these cans of Ensure that are essentially all the nutrients you need. And I would just down a bunch of those. We had 24 cases of 48
we had a full Thule roof
packed
carrier
with Ensure.
packed with Ensure.
Yeah. And so the nutritionists that helped out and recommended all this stuff, you got to take this Ensure. This is what you're going to take. But what they didn't account, again, practical aspects of an event, is that not only do you get flavor fatigue, you can't absorb all that stuff. You can't take all that stuff. So,
for 10 days straight, yeah.
Exactly. So after about a day and a half, I don't know if you remember, Johnny, but all those cans in the back of the van, you guys were using them. You would slide the door open because at night I would be riding through the night and the wild, crazy dogs in the south would chase me, and I would say, "Dog, dog, dog," on the radio, and you take the cans and you'd be throwing them at the dogs to try and get them off me because I'd be chased by dogs through the night in these crazy areas.
We tell that story at least once a year. At least once a year.
Gosh.
I tell that story. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So actually, that's unique. You've been on the Wide World of Sports for all those 3 events. So you RAAM, Ironman, and Tour de France.
Yeah.
Holy cow, Steve. That was incredible. I've known Paulo since 98, 99. I've met with him for coffee, for dinners. We've told a million stories, but there were so many stories in there that I was not aware of that are so inspiring for me.
Yeah, really inspiring. And we talked about the quote. He said, you've got the failures are the doors you have to go through to get to success. And that's a really important quote. And there were just so many stories where he really lived that quote.
Yeah, I think his life embodies that quote. From not being able to swim well enough as a triathlete to not even be considered to get in the pool with the McGill swim team, to then finally being good enough to make it into the slow lane and to persevere all the way through to the fast lane. When I think a lot of us, if we had really good run potential, really good bike potential, we might have said, maybe we'll give up triathlon because I don't really like swimming and I'm not good at it. He leaned into that door.
Totally leaned into that challenge and the difficulties with it, but just really had that growth mindset, going from those difficulties, trying to figure it out, move to the next stage, and just doing that over and over again, not just in swimming, but also in his work and training career and his racing career.
Where some people are afraid of those doors or afraid of what might happen on the other side of those doors, I think Paulo, throughout his career, has sought out those doors. So finding a friend who's going to drive him down to Austin, not knowing what to expect, putting his whole life on the line so that he could become the best in the world is incredible. I don't think many people are brave enough to take that journey. And then each time he's gone through that, he's experienced failure, he's come out the other side and said, I'm going to be better. So as an athlete, as an entrepreneur, as a sports scientist, he's found those doors, pushed his way through it, and come out the other side extremely successful.
And another story that I don't know if I had never heard of it, and I'm not sure if you heard about, but when he got some financial support. And the person who gave it to him said, you got to pay this back. And he was thinking, well, you mean like financially, I've got to pay you back with interest. And he's like, no, you've got to pay some, like in the future, you've got to help someone in their journey. And he's done that over and over again.
And I think in part 2, we're going to hear how Paulo has consistently paid back the cycling community in Canada for that first investment that he got as a young amateur athlete.
Absolutely. And also in part 2, we hear about Paulo's journey with Canadian Mike Woods, sub 4-minute mile, but also a Tour de France stage winner, and that crazy journey that there's just so many stories we've never heard before publicly. So join us for part 2 with Paulo Saldanha. Hey Pedalcast fans, you can now reach out to John and Steve through email. Our email is longhall@umfm.com. longhall@umfm.com. So you can send us all your questions, all your compliments, and we might get to them on the Pedalcast. So thanks for listening, and reach out to let us know what you're thinking. Thanks for listening to the Long Haul Pedalcast. Be sure to subscribe and keep listening to all of these incredible stories that will help inspire you to create your own long haul journey.